How do we raise emotionally mature boys? That's a great question. As a father of an 8-year-old boy myself, I often ask myself that question or one's very similar to it. Like, am I doing the right thing or am I doing this the right way? Am I raising my son the way that he should be raised? And I think there's a lot of times where we get societal pressures to raise our boys in a certain way. And if you're a dad who's struggling to connect with his son and you're struggling whether you're handling things the right way or not, the truth is there are so many stereotypes out there about raising boys that we will often fall into a rut as fathers where we will just do things like they were when we grew up, or we will completely distance ourselves and lose that meaningful connection with our sons. But here's the good news. Dads can make a difference in the lives of their sons when you learn to accept that boys don't always match the image that society has come to expect. And that's okay. And I'm talking about the image of proper behavior and success in school and how to navigate explosive, rough and tumble play. We're going to dive into all of that today on this episode of the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Today, I have the conversation with Dr. Michael Thompson. He is a behavioral expert when it comes to boys. He is a consultant, author, and psychologist specializing in children and families. He's the author of many books, but two in particular that I want to dive into today in our conversation. First, he co-authored the book Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. And he's the author of Speaking of Boys, Answers to the Most Asked Questions about Raising Sons. Excited to dive into this conversation with Dr. Michael Thompson on this episode of the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Dr. Michael Thompson, welcome to the Dads Making a Difference podcast. It's an honor to have you on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Cam, and call me Michael from here on, okay?
Absolutely, will do.
I appreciate the respect, but let's make it informal.
Okay. Well, Michael, like I said, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm just so enthralled with your work and your research that you've done as a dad of a young boy of 8 turning 9. And based on my experience in education and working with youth and boys of all ages, and I'm really eager to dive in today. But I had mentioned in our introduction your work in really raising boys and your research in those areas and the books that you've written. And I just wanted to ask you, what got you in your story? You've been doing this for a long time. What got you to this point, and what really inspired you to start this life of research?
Working in schools and boys in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my PhD dissertation on eating disorders in girls.
Okay.
I was raised in my graduate school years in a kind of a feminist environment. I was very concerned about the ways in which girls were being asked to distort their bodies and their lives around weight and thinness. And so I wrote my dissertation on anorexic-like behaviors in otherwise normally functioning girls. And if you had told me back then that I would become a boy expert, I would have thought, what? Are you kidding me? And what happened was I began consulting to schools.
Okay.
And in schools, if you're a psychologist or any kind of mental health professional or learning specialist, you're going to see way more boys than girls. And if you're in a position, as I was, consulting with teachers,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have many more teachers frustrated with boys than they are frustrated with girls. And you're going to have many more boys you're nodding because this is absolutely true.
I know right? This is absolutely true. Yeah.
And there are just many more boys going to the principal's office. There are many more boys getting in trouble for their language and their physicality. And they're bullying as if girls didn't bully. They do.
Yeah. Yes.
But boys get into physical altercations. And so the discipline comes down, bam, on them. And you don't have to be in schools very long to realize that schools are a pretty bad fit for boys, and boys are a pretty bad fit for schools.
Yep.
and that there are a lot of collisions, a lot of friction, and sometimes in the lives of some boys, just nonstop trouble.
Yeah.
And as a psychologist consulting to schools, I I I couldn't not see that boys were having the problem in school. Everybody in the society was talking about gender equity and how do we get equal pay for women. And I thought, yeah, but all these boys think school's a jail,
Mm-hmm.
and it pretty much is for them.
Yeah, it is a struggle. And you see me nodding because, my context, I've been an educator or in education for, this is year 17. And
Right.
elementary school, middle school, high school, all levels. And what you are describing is exactly what I've seen. And I compare it to that toddler toy that's the red and blue ball with the shapes cut into it. And you're trying to put the right shape into the ball through the right hole. The system is not built for boys.
Right.
And it's like their entire schooling career, they're just heading up against this wall that won't budge. You're trying to put the shape in the wrong spot. And because they're doing that, people keep correcting them. No, you're not doing this right. You're not doing this right. And I have to tell you, to be honest, I have been guilty of that at times in my career, times where frustration has overtaken, the heart or the actual acknowledgement of that this is hard for boys. Why do you think it is? Let's stay on the education piece for a little bit, but why do you think it is that the system is so hard for our boys to fit into? And it's such a hard way to say it that way because I don't believe in that. Like the system should reflect the kids that we have, but we don't live in that world. So,
Well, from a boy's point of view, what is school about?
mm,
It's about sitting down and listening to people and doing things that are low priority for a boy.
right. They
Okay.
really are.
I was interviewing a 6-year-old boy when I was writing Raising Cain at Dan Kinlan. And the 6-year-old boy said to me, "You can't do anything in kindergarten."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, what do you mean you can't do anything?" He said, "You can't get on the tables, you can't wrestle, you can't do anything."
Yeah. This is terrible. This is no fun. I can't climb on anything or jump off anything risky.
Right. So look, if you were giving tens of thousands of tests to girls to get all of psychological profile of girls, it would be a girl bell-shaped curve.
Right.
And if you gave all the tens of thousands of tests to boys, it would be a boys bell-shaped curve. And if you superimpose one on the other, they're 90% overlapping.
Mm.
Kids are much more human than they are gendered. Their need for love and guidance and good teaching and challenge is the same. That's why co-education is not nuts. And it's why I object to an otherwise lovely man like Michael Gurian, who wrote The Wonder of Boys. He wrote another book called Boys and Girls Learn Differently. And he talks
Mm.
about the boy brain and the girl brain. And I think that's scientific rubbish. The brains are 90% overlapping.
Wow.
But let's talk about what those 10% of differences are.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's by school age, 3/4 of the boys in the class are more physically active than any girl. So it's not overlapping. There are only 1/4 of the boys who are like the girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls on that end are a little bit rugged and they kind of prefer boy play. But for the teachers, where it's sitting and focusing and reading things on a page and trying to keep the classroom quiet, because try as we might to work with teachers, they tend to think that listening, I mean, a quiet classroom and good listening is the key to learning. That is not necessarily the case. Active learning and creative learning and project-based learning isn't always quiet, but many people go into education are themselves very good students,
Yeah.
for whom the school setting worked very well. And that's true of almost all elementary teachers.
Products of the system.
Yeah, 85, 90% of them women.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were good at this stuff, and they don't mean to be mean to boys. It's just that boys are more disruptive in their classrooms.
And I've witnessed or observed in my experience, elementary school, I saw exactly what you're describing. And I have a son who is in grade 3 right now, who over the last couple of years was the was the kid who said, "Oh yeah, he's very active. Well, he moves around. He moves around a lot." I'm like, "Yeah, let the kid stand at his desk. Give him a kick band on the bottom of his chair. Let him fidget. Let him move. Let him interact." Oh yeah, he's very distracted. He gets up, but he's a good helper. Like we'll be sitting in the front of the classroom, and it'll be quiet time, and Braylon will just stand up, walk, push all the chairs in, put in all the drawers to make sure, and then he'll come sit back down. And in my brain, I'm like, what's wrong with that? He's listening, he can hear you, but like this is not his jam. Like the system is not built for him. And then you get older kids where I'm at now, high schools, where we walk this fine line between engagement and learning and compliance. And I think for a long time, our boys struggle with the idea of compliance, and our teachers struggle with the idea of compliance. It looks very different for the two of them, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And look, there's always a challenge with children of any age to make what you're teaching them relevant, because they're interested in their friends, they're interested in their sports, they're interested in their devices, and it's hard to get their attention. But it's just harder for boys, and so 3/4 of school suspensions land on boys, 3/4 of expulsions land on boys, and you're going to have more boys in LD classes, and some of them are there because the boy brain is more variable than the girl brain. The girl brain tends to be in total. There's a range of the girl brain, but it's not as wide a range. So you've got more boys who are diagnosed autistic. You have 3 to 4 times more boys defined diagnosed as ADHD. So you've got more neurodiversity in boys than in girls, and neurodiversity is a challenge to the classroom. Any classroom, any teacher. And look, Cam, I started out as a public school teacher in New Hampshire. I had a 7th grade homeroom, and it's impossible to get through a week without wishing the boys were just a little like the girls, right?
Yeah.
If they would only sit longer, if they were only quieter, it'd be easier to run a classroom. It's impossible not to wish. But one of the things about my now 29 years at consulting to an all-boys school, grades 7 through 12. Now, it's private school, privileged kids. But because you're not comparing the boys to girl behavior, you're just comparing boys to each other.
Yeah.
And you recalibrate what you're expecting. I was once in a boys' school in Toronto, and I was in a 5th grade. I was following a 5th grade class. This was from my book, The Pressured Child. I was following a 5th grade class of these boys, and they were doing a research project with a technology class. And they had a rubric for doing research online, and they were going online and finding out facts for their research projects. And the boys were in pairs, and they were very nicely 2 chairs in front of every computer screen. And the boys were paired up and stuff like that. None of the boys were sitting, and they were all talking to each other, shouting at the screens. I found it. And at the end of the class, I said to the woman teacher, I said, gee, you have a very high tolerance for noise. And she said, really? I thought it was kind of quiet today.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, you've been in an all-boys school so long, you no longer know what's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't quiet by a co-ed school standard.
Right.
But because it was a boys' school, she'd adapted to the kind of boys shouting and a little bit of the boy exhibitionism, which can be quite problematic in a co-ed classroom.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's amazing. Context is key, right? Yes. Context is key when you look at it. You look at your research, and you are a boy expert, in how boys develop and how to connect with them. In the book you co-authored, Raising Cain, you realize that, the emotional lives of boys are important. And yes. I think guys are listening to this right now, and we've talked about education. I want to shift to being a father and being a dad.
Yep.
Why is it important for dads to be aware and be involved in the emotional development and aspect of their children's lives, their boys' lives?
Because most fathers have gotten um, a narrow definition of what it is to be masculine.
Mm.
And most fathers themselves, um, well, there was one psychologist who said being raised male in the United States is traumatic. And I don't accept that. I think that's hyperbolic. But you can't be raised as a boy in this society without suppressing your feelings, denying some of your feelings, and aspiring to something that most of us aren't,
Right.
which is strong and tough all the time, and unafraid and courageous, right?
Right.
And assertive and aggressive.
Yeah.
I was an anxious little boy and a very bookish little boy, and I wasn't all those things that you were supposed to be. And it turns out, looking back, I didn't understand it at the time, but team sports made me incredibly anxious.
Mm.
I'm actually not an uncoordinated person, and I love running, biking, canoeing, kayaking, swimming, right?
Yeah.
I love solo sports. Put me on a basketball court as a 10-year-old, I was miserable. I was
Yeah.
thinking, Jesus, I'm going to screw up. The other boys are going to hate me. Don't give me the ball. I'm going to throw up a clunker. And all of the requirements of being a sporty boy
Mm.
made me miserable.
Yeah.
But I thought all the other boys were having a great time. And it wasn't until I became a psychologist, or actually a teacher who became very interested in why boys struggle so much in school, was what propelled me to go and retrain as a psychologist. It wasn't until I got boys to talk about what it was really like for them inside.
Mm.
Um, so a dad has to know you don't you don't get a standard issue boy. When your boy's born, he's got all the equipment,
Yeah.
but you don't know whether he's going to like the and fit the image of masculinity.
Right.
And by the way, Dad, maybe you didn't fit that well yourself, but now you think your son should, or you're afraid if he doesn't fit in, he's going to be teased or bullied if he's not strong and tough. So dads say stupid things like, a boy reports that somebody's picking on him in school, and dads say, well, just hit him. Well, hell, if you have a son who's going to hit somebody, he probably would have hit somebody already.
Yeah.
But most dads don't have a fourth grade son who wants to punch somebody.
Yeah.
It's against the rules, going to get him in trouble. And besides, they don't know if that kid's going to come
Punch him
back
back.
and pound them. Right?
Yeah. It's so
They're
true.
realistically afraid. And so this kind of advice, just hit them.
Mm-hmm.
Really? I don't think so. It's a more complicated story. So a father needs to know, and this is the subtitle of our book, Raising Cain, was protecting the emotional life of boys.
Mm-hmm.
What a father has to say is, well, son, how are you going to handle that? That sounds tough. What do you think you can do? How do other boys handle that, kid? Right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's bullying, maybe it's not, but you don't want to give a simple answer that somehow fits in with a stereotype of masculinity, because that may not work for your son.
Yeah. Yeah, because boys often face the societal pressure to conform to these rigid gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting. How can fathers challenge these stereotypes and support their sons in pursuing a diverse range of interests or activities, irrespective of traditional gender roles? Because I believe what you were pointing to is the team sports versus the individual sports versus the
Right.
you speak of rough and tumble play versus being a
Right.
little bit more introverted. How can fathers challenge these stereotypes and encourage their boys and support their boys in being engaged in different activities than maybe the dad is used to?
Well, by being honest,
Hmm.
by saying this is the kind of man I am, this is the kind of boy I was, and I understand not all boys are like that, and you may not be like that. We have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is model it. But I think most fathers think, and this is because we're in the grip of the stereotype of masculinity, which is we're always strong, we're always tough, we always have the answers. And of course, that's bull, you know what.
Yeah.
And we're not always strong, and we're often scared. And so if a father says to his son, that's scary, I get that. I would have been scared when I was your age. Took me a long time to not be scared in that situation. Just a father's honesty about his own emotions. Because, I had a 13-year-old boy once in this private school where I work, and he was an 8th grader, and he said, my dad is the CEO of a company that employs 300 people, and I can't even sit and do my homework for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And he was saying, my father's here, I'm here. I don't know how hell you get from here to there. It looks impossible to me.
Right.
So one of the things we do at my boys' school is we have an 8th grade men's breakfast, and it's 8th grade boys and their fathers or grandfathers or a guardian, or sometimes if a boy has a complicated family situation, he wants to invite a teacher or a coach, he invites him to that men's breakfast. But we have all the men talk about what they were like in 8th grade and whether they were good at school, whether they got in trouble, what they were afraid of. And it's really unfamiliar for the fathers. It's tables of 8, 4 dads and 4 boys. And the fathers all want to give a lecture about how to be a good 8th grader. And I have to tell the dads, this is not lecture time, fathers. You don't get to do your favorite thing, which is teaching your sons about life. We want you to talk about what your life was like in 8th grade. And I push them. That's my role at that breakfast. But I tell them, be honest about your life. Be honest. If you were a clueless 8th grader, you were a frightened 8th grader, if you were late to puberty and you were constantly worried about it because you were a little guy and all of your classmates looked bigger and stronger than you because they were, right?
Right.
Be honest about that. It's so hard. It's so hard for dads to actually cop to what they felt when they were boys, because now they are pretty confident men, and it's not a place you want to revisit, actually.
No, it's not. It's interesting that you say that. Get out of the teaching role with your boys, because I'll often find myself asking my son questions. And I want to dive into questioning for a moment, but asking my son questions, and he'll respond. And instead of just letting him take ownership over that response and just telling me what's going on, I didn't quickly turn into like the father role model coach mode. And I just, oh yeah, that's great. Well, have you tried this, or have you done this? And you should do this. I have to catch myself. I do have to catch myself on that.
All of us do.
Yeah.
All of us do. We love to teach our kids. We think we can transfer the wisdom to them. But it's teenage girls who stop their fathers from doing this. Dad, just listen. Don't problem solve.
Yeah, but sons won't.
Boys tend not to set their fathers straight. They just kind of fall silent and go inside. And then the father thinks, why doesn't my son talk to me? And he's not hearing that he's kind of giving a little sermonette. And the son is kind of gotten, 2 sentences of a sermonette from your dad, and you know where it's headed. And it just wears you out right there.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to say, how do we, but Michael, I'm really asking, how do I? How do we reframe our questioning and our conversations with our boys so that we are not doing that to them? Because that's really doing it to them, not having a conversation with them.
So, in the last chapter, Raising Cain, sort of my foundational book, I've written 10 books, but that was the big one. and the one that I think broke new ground. And I wrote it with Dan Kinlan, who was a professor at the Harvard School of Public Health, a researcher, which I'm not. I'm a clinician. And Dan said, "You're the advice giver guy. You write the last chapter." And we wrote suggestions for raising a boy as a more emotionally literate person. And the advice I gave then 24 years ago, I still give, which is use your son as a consultant on his own life. Ask him questions that only he can answer. So let me give you an example. If I say to you, Cam, do you like your math teacher, Mr. Andrews, better than last year's math teacher, Ms. Bailey?
That would be only a question I could answer.
There's only one person on earth who can answer that question.
Yeah.
Right? And if I say, all right, so what if I want to say it another way? I say, I'm noticing you're more excited about math. Is it the difference between your teachers? But if you're a dad and you can name the teachers, you have your son's attention. But what dads traditionally do is, how are things going in math?
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about my marks right now. Yeah.
Right. Of course, the moment your father says, how are things going in math? I'm supposed to live up to my father's benchmarking me. He's judging me. He's measuring me. That closed down a conversation. But if you use your son as a consultant on his own life and you ask questions that only he can answer, he'll hear it. Yeah. And he's more inclined to answer. You might have to ask 2 or 3 questions that way. But if you want kids to talk, you have to give them respect of acknowledging in the way you ask the question that no one on earth, including the father, has the information that this 10-year-old boy has, this 12-year-old boy has, this 14-year-old boy has.
Hey guys, I wanted to take a moment and talk about our community of DMD brothers in the DMD Mastermind. We are men who help each other to stay focused and intentional in our pursuits of personal, professional, physical, financial, emotional, and spiritual growth. We are a community of men who bring courage, wisdom, and transparency to unfiltered conversations that challenge us to be more impactful men, to be dads making a difference. We do this through our online and in-person events where men come together to speak into each other's lives and then turn around and do the deep work to create change in their families, in their businesses, and in the community around them. If you are wondering if this community might be right for you, you can find more information on the DMD Mastermind, and you can also book a call directly with me at dmdmastermind.com. Now, let's get back to our show. Well, let's talk about the 12, 14, 16, 18,
Okay,
what a time that is. I've noticed, I have an elementary age son, but I've worked with a lot of teenagers and preteens into teenagers, and they are so different from the beginning of one year to the next. And conversation is it's not a strong point. It isn't. And it's hard to navigate some of those conversations. So for the dads who are listening, who have teenage sons, does that strategy of putting them as the expert in that conversation, is that still a strategy that works even through those teenage years?
Not if you're expecting it will produce paragraphs of replies. A 14-year-old boy once, I remember the kids who set me straight. And a 14-year-old boy said to me once, Dr. Thompson, there's no point in talking to my mother. And I said, why? He said, no matter how much I talk, she's always disappointed I don't say more.
Oh, I can't say enough. Yeah.
Right? So I learned when I went from a co-ed school where girls love to come and talk to the psychologist and love to come back for a second meeting. I learned that if I was going to be in a boys' school, I better learn to ask a lot of yes/no questions. And I now do it reflexively. I sit down with a 12-year-old boy and I'm asking him yes/no questions so that he can just nod. Yes, no, nod, go like this, shrug. And we're having a conversation. I'm providing all the verbiage, but I'm never disappointed that he doesn't talk more.
Yeah.
Never. Because if he's telling me his truth by saying yes or no, so you got to train yourself. And this is very difficult for moms. For dads, they have a different problem. Moms are always asking emotion-laden, open-ended questions. Cam, how are you?
Yeah. How do you
Right?
feel?
What's the answer to that, Cam? You know that.
Okay.
Every man knows it.
Fine.
Fine, right?
Yeah. Fine.
Stop this conversation in its tracks.
Yeah.
Where is this headed? Where is this woman gonna wants to take me? Right?
Yeah. Or
To
what are you
some
thinking?
vulnerable
Yeah.
place where I'm gonna feel weak. Dads stop conversations in the ways that you've already described by turning it into a lecture, by trying to teach, by trying to coach.
Mm-hmm.
They get into problem solving. So you have to come at kids with inquiry. You have to be satisfied with yes, no questions. You have to ask a follow-up question that's answerable with another yes, no.
Mm-hmm.
And if your son is getting more remote, you say, son, am I drilling down too much here? Is this, are you feeling on the hot seat?
Yeah.
Yes, Dad. Okay, well then, will you answer one more question? You negotiate, right?
Okay.
If
Yeah.
you haven't asked the crucial question, you say, can I get permission from you to ask one more question? And then only ask one more question. Don't violate the negotiation.
Yeah. That's good. For the dads who reach out, and they're I've had dads reach out to me, they're just having difficulties bonding with their sons, like bonding,
Right.
they'll say bonding with their kids, but it gets into like a lot of conversations about sons. That's why I'm so excited to have you here today, is because
Yeah.
like I don't know how to bond with my son. Like maybe they've had different interests. Maybe it's a dad who's been into, you brought up the sports example, a dad who played team sports growing up, and this was the rah thing. And his son just isn't into that. He's into like the
Right.
Minecraft and the Among Us and the video game type thing. Like, how do men build strong emotional relationships with their sons?
Well, you start early, and you start it by doing rituals with your son.
Mm.
So I had a father who told me that his three and a half year old son always would wake him in the morning, and his son wanted his father to get up and go in the bathroom, and they would cross swords in the toilet, right? That was the 3.5 year old's idea of a really good time with his dad, right?
Yeah,
You can see that, right?
I can see that. Yeah.
um, so that may not be to your taste, but what you want to develop with your child is rituals. And the ritual doesn't have to be words, and it's not necessarily a digging into his psyche conversation. It's a thing that the two of you do that works for both of you to make him feel like uh, uh, a better boy, a strong boy, a lovable boy, and it makes you feel like a confident, lovable father.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. For my dad, it was my dad loved making pancakes. And he was an architect and an artist, and he made all kinds of shapes. And making batter with him, watching him make shapes out of it and cooking different animals. I was a little boy then, it was very vivid. Later on, my father gardened.
Mm.
My father was not a team playing athlete. It was not something he expected of me. It's not something we shared. In any case, I was raised in Manhattan. So
Yeah.
it's not that easy to be out on the fields and. But he gardened, and we had a little brownstone in the back. We planted bulbs and we gardened. I'm still gardening. I was gardening this morning, Cam.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My father's influence on me. My father loved fishing.
Mm.
My father loved canoeing, and he took me. And you don't have to talk to your son about why you love canoeing. He can just see it. You love canoeing.
Yeah.
I could see that my father loved that. And because he loved it, I wanted to love it too. So you do activities together. But if you're trying to sell your son on rooting for the Green Bay Packers, and he's obviously bored watching it on TV, find something else to do. you're not making the sale. Watch what he gets excited about. If he's interested in video games and you aren't, jolly well ask him to teach you about them.
Yeah.
And sit and watch. My son loved video games. I found them extremely boring. He
Yeah.
was so grateful when I sat and watched him play, and he showed me why he liked the game so much.
Yeah. That's
And he would talk to me about why he loved the graphics so much.
yeah.
I thought, really? But my son was headed for art school, right? I didn't know that. I didn't share that with him.
Yeah.
But he loved the graphics, and he loved teaching me about what he saw. So I had to try and be curious about that, even though I found the games boring. Yeah. And I'm sure he sensed that. I didn't want to play them a ton, right? Yeah. But I was curious.
Yeah. You and I were able to have a conversation late last month, setting up this interview. And one of the things that you brought up in that conversation challenged me over the last, 4 to 5 weeks of making my son the expert. And the video games, I asked you about video games because he's into this, and I've never been into it. And he has been blown away when I was like, he likes Minecraft and Among Us and this like snowboarding game on the iPad. I don't know. And I would just say, hey, Bray, do you want to show Dad how to play this game for about 20 minutes? You want to show me how to play? One, it gives us our like time for screen time, but it also is, he's like, yeah. And so then, and he is talking nonstop that entire time. And he's teaching me how to play it. And it's been cool. And now he's like, this is something we should do every Thursday. Like
he's 9 and he's his dad's teacher. Yeah. And he wants it to be a weekly event. Good for him. That's exactly, Ken, that's exactly what I mean by creating a ritual.
Yeah. Cool. For the dads who might be facing something tough right now, and we want to navigate a conversation with our sons, regardless of the age, maybe it's a conversation over discipline or something, a choice that they've made. How do we enter into that while taking into consideration their emotional health?
Discipline, make it short and sweet and definitive. Right?
Right.
We're big and we can unwittingly belittle kids. We can humiliate them. We can really denigrate them in a hurry. So say it's a mistake, gotta have a response to this because this was really dumb and this is what it's going to be. And does the prisoner have anything to say?
Yeah. Is there any words that can be used against you? No.
So I make it succinct. Don't on layers of moral preaching. It's done. I had a boy at my school once at graduation. He did an imitation of the dean, and he did an imitation of himself. We have a punishment at my school, which is for kids who really break the rules or tick us off. We have an hour, but we're a day school, and an hour is on Saturday morning. Okay. The kids they hate it like hell. They got to come back to school on Saturday. Their parents hate it. Everybody hates an hour. Yeah. And this boy was now 18, was imitating himself as a 9th grader, talking to the dean of the upper school. And he was giving all these excuses and evasions and telling stories and everything. And then he'd jump and play the director of the upper school, the dean, who said nothing, just looked at him. Just said nothing, looked at him. And after the kid got through, 12 evasions and 5 excuses, he jumped back and played the role of the dean. And this is what the dean said. Nice try. That's an hour.
Short and succinct. Yeah.
Nice try. That's an hour. Right.
Yeah. That's good. Parenting is an ongoing journey and mistakes are inevitable. I've made mistakes. I'm sure every guy listening to this and yourself have made mistakes. Them. Yeah. What advice do you have for dads who may feel uncertain or overwhelmed at times And how can they bounce back from challenges and continue to make a positive impact on their sons' lives?
Learn to apologize to your kids.
Hmm.
When you said something mean or stupid, when you haven't thought something through.
Yeah.
That's if you've made a mistake.
Hmm.
Learn to apologize. You don't have to throw yourself on the floor and rend your garments. Just say, I messed up on that. I'm sorry. First of all, it's great modeling.
Hmm.
And for an emotionally sound adult has to know how to apologize. And so you're modeling that for your son. The second thing is you don't have to have an immediate reply. You say, I'm a little confused right now. I'm gonna think about this. You know, a man came up to me once and he said, my parents were always telling, I was always making requests of my parents, this, that, the other thing. And he said, my parents, both my mother and my father always said, oh, really? Okay. Well, we'll get back to you on that. He said it wasn't until I was an adult, I realized my parents never got back to me. But the modern parent thinks they have to have an answer, have to make a decision right away.
That's right.
And you can say, we're not sure. Give us some time to think about that. No. You know, I can see a 9-year-old saying, no, I have to have a decision now. No, son, no, you don't. I'm sorry. We need to think about that. I need to talk to your mother about that. Right?
Right.
And you teach them patience, you teach them decision making, and you probably should get back to them.
Yeah. And get back to them eventually. Yeah. I had one more question that I wanted to ask you about raising sons as I'm seeing my son get more comfortable with what you call rough and tumble play. So I'm seeing more, some people would see it as aggression. I don't see it. Maybe it's because I've been around a lot of boys who've been his age or a little bit older. What would you say to those who are worried about boys who are, wrestling hands on all the time on the
Does your third
playground,
grader wait to jump you? Does he try and ambush you?
all the time? Yeah. Like, oh, well, in a playing way, like I know if I'm coming around the corner and he's gone downstairs and it's awfully quiet right away, there's a chance that he's springing out of nowhere. But other than that, like he's not trying to ambush me. Like he's trying to engage me in some play.
Of
But
course.
yeah. And when I see
It's
him
a
with his,
play ambush. It's a play ambush, but he wants to get a slight advantage there because you might be a bit larger.
yeah, yeah, a lot
So
larger. Yeah. And I had this
if you want
conversation yesterday with him. I
if
was
you
just
want
about
to
it's safe. It's safe.
yeah. So well, you went right to my point. If you want to show a boy how to be a loving man,
Mm.
wrestling with him is the best way.
Mm.
Because you could crush him.
Mhm.
You could absolutely crush him. You could humiliate him, make him cry. You could crush him, but you don't. You wrestle in a way that makes it fun for him, that creates a sense of competition, and where he gets a good battle out of it. And then mom said to me, but it always ends in tears. And I said, but it's not tears of pain.
Yeah.
It's tears of frustration because the boy wants to take his dad down.
Yeah.
And his dad's too big for that. But the mom said, but he's crying. And I said, well, you know, is he then looking to wrestle with his dad 2 days later?
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about the crying if he's back at it.
Yeah.
But moms think this is going to be emotionally crushing. I just don't believe it. I think it is intimate, it's physical, it's a way of expressing love, but it's also a way of modeling self-control.
Mm.
Because what you want to do is wrestle with your oldest son so that when he's 9 and he's got a 5-year-old younger brother whom he could crush, he doesn't do it.
Yeah.
He wrestles with the 5-year-old who's a little intemperate and out of control. But you watch that 9-year-old wrestle in a way which is an emulation of the way his father wrestled with him. And then you know, oh, I've passed self-control and patience down to my son. He's showing it to his little brother.
That's powerful. That's a great observation, great example of how we want to shape our sons into caring, loving, emotionally intuitive, and strong young men. And
Model.
model, caught, not taught. Is that what they say? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes the little eyes are on you. They're watching you, and they pick up on the little cues. Michael, you brought so much to this conversation. I want to thank you. But I have a question for you because
Are we at the end? We just started. What do you
we
mean?
just
Oh,
started. I know, 45 minutes in. Uh, for you, you've done this for like 50 years. You've been working in this area, but I get the impression from you in our conversations that you're a learner and you're always pushing, you're always looking for another answer and looking to grow. So my question for you is, for you, Michael, what is an area of growth that you're excited about right now or you're diving into?
well, I'm trying to make sense of the teen mental health crisis. The media is all over the teen mental health crisis, and
Yes.
parents are in a total panic about teen mental health. And you know, give you an example. It's not a boy example, but during the pandemic, there was a 50% increase in teenage girls showing up at emergency rooms with suicidal ideation.
Hmm.
And that the media and the Massachusetts, particularly the big papers in Boston, were all over that stat, and everybody assumes. So I have to say, hold on. Um, there's actually a drop in completed suicides
Hmm.
in teens during the pandemic. What? We thought it was up. What?
Yeah.
No. There were more kids talking about it, more online.
Right.
Are there more kids taking their lives?
Hmm.
Um, and how do you handle a kid with suicidal ideation? How do you talk to a kid who says, I'm so anxious, I can't stay in class? As a teacher, how do you handle, because you've got these kind of mini therapeutic opportunities. And I'm interested in teaching teachers to handle these moments. So you want a story about a dean told me that there was a girl who was being rude and disrespectful to teachers, and she said, you got to come into my office in the morning before you start your class. And the girl stood out in the hall, shouted, I can't come in. I have a problem with authority. I was traumatized by a therapist, and I can't be in an office with a person in authority.
Yeah.
This is a pretty aggressive mental health approach on the part of a 17-year-old. And the dean walked out and said, I'm terribly sorry to hear this. Let me walk you to your car, and let's start tomorrow morning in my office. And she walked the girl to her car, put her in the car, and said, see you tomorrow. And you have to have ways of managing mental health moments where you don't panic,
Yeah.
where you don't retaliate, where you do something that is common sense. So because, Cam, my work is mainly working in schools, I'm always training teachers. And the challenge at this moment is how to handle a sixth grade girl who's on her phone in the middle of your class. And when you say, put your phone away, no, I'm anxious, I have to text my mother.
Oh, I know. Oh, yep.
Been
Yeah.
there?
We are there right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're up against that right
So
now.
I'm trying to help teachers with these kinds of challenges.
It's great. There is help needed. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Thanks for sharing that. I always love to hear what areas of focus and passion people are into. So thanks for sharing. Michael, thank you for spending time with us today. I could keep going and going if we had more time, but if people want to learn more about you, your research, the 10 books that you've written and what you're working on now, where can they do that? Where can they find you?
Uh, 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 Michael Thompson PhD.com
Okay.
is my website. You'll learn a lot about me there, but I don't look for them all, but I'm told I have 25 or 30 videos out on YouTube. So
Okay.
if you want to go through YouTube, I'm not a YouTuber particularly at my age, but if you want to hear me give a talk on boys or on my book Best Friends Worst Enemies about the social lives of children, I'm on there, and some of them are pretty well produced and pretty well edited. So they're not terrible to watch.
Amazing. Michael, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking time with us today.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me. Take care. Keep up your good work supporting dads.
Thank you.
Dads are important.